Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. Last week I did a video on hate watching and what I think of the phenomena in general. I am of two minds on the practice in general, and you can get all of my thoughts on that in the previous video, but what came out of that discussion in the comments was an interesting thought that I've had recently that I think bears exploring some more. This is really only something that I've been mulling over for the past couple of months. And I haven't really worked out exactly what the thoughts were until I was inspired to do so by some of the comments I got in the video on hate watching. What I have been struggling to articulate clearly, and came into sharp focus as I continued to discuss and think about the topic of hate watching, is that I really think the role of critics in the storytelling landscape is misunderstood today. Critics are generally viewed as a feedback mechanism for the author, or as some kind of a tastemaker, someone who makes recommendations about a product to the audience. I think both of those roles are important, and they definitely can be a part of the critic's job, but I don't think they are the primary part of a critic's responsibilities. In fact, I believe it is only modern communications that have arisen in the last century or so that have really made them a meaningful part of the critic's portfolio, without, at the very least, communication at the speed of radio. Likewise, the opinions of a critic are not likely to be taken seriously by an author in a vacuum. It is only really when they become very widespread, say through, again, a mass media dissemination, that they really begin to have a serious influence on the way the author writes. Yes, they may hear some criticism and take it personally, they may be offended or depressed, but influenced by it? Well, that is much more difficult to do. There is a reason authors tend to pick very trusted editors and reviewers to look over their stories rather than just, well, for example, posting them on the internet and then taking whatever criticism they get. No, I think the overlooked role of the critic, the one that has begun to reassert itself in the days of internet commentary, is that of an educator. Now, that might sound a little bit arrogant to say about a whole class of people. To say that there is a group of people who are qualified to educate another group of people, on the face of it, seems a little bit obnoxious. But at the same time, when I look at auto mechanics, well, I reflexively think that they are qualified to educate me on the subject of engine repair. Even though there are undoubtedly terrible mechanics out there who would do more to destroy my engine than keep it running smoothly. So I don't think it's absurd to say that somebody who spends their whole life studying storytelling is qualified to offer opinions that illuminate the subject to another person. Now, it's true that writers can certainly fill this function as well. The problem is that authors think almost exclusively from the storyteller perspective. Yes, there are some authors out there who can think from the audience perspective, but frankly, most of them that I've met cannot. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the entire profession of storytelling, whether it's as a playwright or a scriptwriter or as a regular author, has a position built into the industry to help solve this problem, namely the editor. The editor looks at what the author is trying to say and then considers it from the point of view of the final audience and offers feedback on whether what the author is trying to say comes through, comes off as nonsense, or says something entirely different. An editor attempts to give the author the perspective of the audience. A critic attempts to do a similar function for the audience, just in reverse. A critic tries to find what the author is trying to say and make it read more clearly for the audience. Critics should have a broad knowledge of narrative techniques, of figures of speech, and of allusion, just for a start, in order to help the audience understand the way these things are being used by an author to bring their story to fruition. They should be prepared to compare and contrast these techniques in the story they are analyzing to better or worse exist throughout the canon of literature they are discussing. In short, critics should function like those magicians who show the audience their trick so that they can appreciate the skill, the time, and the effort that went into making those tricks function. There are many stage magicians who resist doing this because they believe that it will spoil the show for the audience, and perhaps that is true for a small percentage of the audience. But I have had many magic tricks explained to me, and I still enjoy seeing them performed because I appreciate the skill, the technique, the time, and the dedication that goes into making them happen. And frankly, I myself may know how they are performed, but I don't have the skill to pick out the performance of them, at least if the magician is good at what they are doing. Now, if the magician is not so good, if I see them hiding the ball or slipping the card up their sleeve, maybe I won't be that impressed. And maybe that is why so many mediocre authors have such a big problem with critics. However, there is a hidden cost to this kind of criticism. It is a cost that goes past just putting time and effort into understanding the craft of storytelling. It is the cost, of course, of hate watching. If a critic is to educate on stories, they must educate with stories. They must educate using the stories that people are interested in hearing. Otherwise, people will just ignore them. Now, I know it's very frustrating for storytellers to see the beautiful and very important parts of their craft expounded upon through the vessel of all the mediocre storytelling that we are getting today. However, neither critics nor authors can pick their audience. You cannot train the public. You can only offer them your best storytelling or your best criticism on a subject they find interesting. I have heard many people state that if there was meaning to criticism of all the bad art that we are getting, then at the very least, we would be ready to move on from this very basic part of the discussion we are having. We could finally stop talking about bad media and start talking about better stories, or at least how to build better stories. Well, first of all, welcome to the channel. I have an entire series on this subject called Saving Storytelling. But more importantly, this is not by any means true. As I said, one of the roles of the critic, in fact, the primary role of the critic, is to educate. And far more people require the fundamentals of an education than require the most extreme versions of it. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division will always have a bigger role to play in education than calculus. Lots of people need to understand the 4 basic functions of math. Very few people need to understand a related rates problem. And math, like storytelling, has always benefited from offering examples that are timely and relevant to the things people do in real life rather than hypotheticals. You will get a person to understand fractions much faster using pi or money than you will just using wooden blocks or numbers. And a critic will be able to expound on storytelling in a better, more effective way using relevant stories from the media around them rather than using abstract examples or dredging up old material as a starting point. I understand why that's not ideal for a lot of people who have been discussing and analyzing and dissecting media for a long time, who would rather dig way out into the weeds of very deep and involved discussions rather than go back to 2 + 2 = 4 every time a new piece of media comes out. But that does not remove the responsibility of the critic to use those opportunities to try and educate people new to this kind of discussion of storytelling. I'm not saying it's bad if you're over that part of the discussion. I'm over it too. There's a reason I am not that kind of a critic. I'm just saying, think carefully about the landscape and how we improve it over time. Don't just think about how you're going to move on from where you are in the storytelling landscape. That is important, that is very helpful, but it is not necessarily going to change the overall state of storytelling. At least that's what I think on the matter. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.